have to start over here. I had a customer show up, which I had to, go deal with. And I may have to pause again to deal with. But I wanted to get through some of this, so, really quick. If I could scroll down here enough. Would I prefer, this is specifically referring to Open Morrowind, but this kind of applies in general, a always hit combat system mod over the dice system. Personally, I do like the dice system. I do think having dice as a relevant part of the combat is a decent thing within reason. That is to say, I do think there should be a point at which you are not at 99% chance to hit, you're at 100. And that involves skill or levels or whatever. But I do like having a degree of random within combat, at least to a certain extent, and then within reason. You have mentioned before that you're a fan of both Star Trek DS9 and Babylon 5. What do you think of the many similarities between the show? Do you think DS9 stole its ideas from Babylon 5? Does it matter? I like that last question. I'll get to that in a moment. I personally don't think DS9 intentionally stole any or many or particularly many problems or ideas from Babylon 5, and I don't think it would be a problem even if they did. I think the two shows were sufficiently divergent and only got more so as time went on. And I do think that the coincidence of the timing was certainly bad, and there probably were at least some ideas out there that were pushed onto one show from the other and vice versa. However, I like your last question because does it matter? That in my opinion is the exact correct thing to ask, which in my opinion, no. I don't think it does matter. I don't think it should matter. I think that even if DS9 was a complete blatant ripoff of Babylon 5, if DS9 was still a good show, then that wouldn't bother me as much, because it would still involve the effort, the time, the creative work and involvement in order to make a good show. I think I would prefer it if they weren't a complete ripoff, but if they were a ripoff and were still good, then I'm okay with that and don't really have any problems on the matter. Next question here. I just read an article in which it said all future Crytek games will be free to play. The reason they give is they don't like the way companies milk the consumers for DLC and premium services. What are your thoughts on this? To be completely honest with you, I don't like this trend. I never have. I prefer games. How do I put this? I've talked before about Flash games, and about how I don't like that, and one of the reasons I don't get into FTP, MMOs, and RPGs and stuff like that is they, in general, tend to have less content, less substance to them, for obvious reasons, because they're the payment model and the way they do things. So I prefer having a game like, just to use the example, World of Warcraft, where I pay a subscription fee for my content, or a game like Dragon Age, or a game like Skyrim, or a game like, Zelda that comes out and I pay for it and it's a good freaking game and there's no FTP involved. I don't like that. I never have. I don't even know how to explain it properly. Or rather, I do, but it would take a really long time, and I don't want to get into that massive debate. But suffice it to say, I think it sets a bad precedent every time another company goes to the FTP model, and I generally personally tend to think of it as a company that has given up. That they have finally said, okay, we can't do this the right way, the normal way, so we're going to go ahead and do it the cheap way, and see if that works. Not saying necessarily that all FTPs are bad, I'm just getting the point across. Do you think in the War with Thalmor DLC for Skyrim that factions in the Aldmeri Dominion will defect, and who is more likely to defect, the Khajiit or the Wood Elves? And in that same DLC, do you think war machines such as catapults and ballistas will be added and usable by the player? I do think it is very likely that we'll see some kind of internal revolution thing going on within the Dominion DLC. Not just from the other races, but of course from the High Elves themselves. Personally, I would think we would most likely be seeing the Wood Elves forming their own actual resistance corps, and us, there would be missions involved in helping them, and if we don't, then their resistance fails and we lose their support in the final battle, something along those lines, just off the top of my head. As far as the catapults thing, yes, I could see that happening. Modders are already getting very close to and or succeeding at that kind of vehicular gameplay, and it's something that I think they could and should pull off. Words, and I would really enjoy it if they did it properly. Just sitting there keeping the line and holding the line with the giant artillery just has all kinds of fun written into it. Next question: What do you think of Hope from Final Fantasy XIII as an intentionally scared, whiny kid thrust into issues beyond his kin who needed someone to blame his problems on? This is actually a much longer question, but that's the summary. And I do think that they pulled off that particular aspect of his personality well. That doesn't mean I like him. I do agree that having someone who is a little more down to earth in an FF is an interesting concept, because usually the people in the FFs are very heroic. They're people who go ahead and go forward with things that any normal person would consider suicide, would consider insanity. Nevertheless, I think they could have pulled that off more with fear and with reacting improperly, rather than constantly whining and behaving like this little emo crud face, than the way they, than that. So, that's just my opinion. I do think it was where the concept was. I just don't think they pulled it off that well. Or either that or they did and they were going for something else. I have no idea. Do I think firearms should be added to the Elder Scroll games, and how advanced should they be? Personally, I don't, with one possible exception, and that would be the cannon. And I'm not talking about a hand cannon, I'm talking about a cannon. I think it would be awesome, as I just mentioned, if you were actually able to man a cannon and use it and defend a fort or whatnot. I think that would be very amusing. But I don't think they should get into more advanced stuff just yet. Next question. Do you think the Monster Hunter games would be huge in the United States and the United Kingdom, like in Japan, if they were released on the correct console and not the Wii? Why aren't they? Now, just to get a point out there, I actually bought Monster Hunter Tri on the Wii and enjoyed it. I admit the load times were a little irritating, but that was about it. As I've said, I have nothing against the Wii, strictly speaking. As far as releasing it on a different system where it wouldn't have the load problem and they can actually do the graphics the way they clearly wanted to, that might have helped it, but you have to also understand that the Monster Hunter niche, the audience for that series, has always been relatively small and rather specific. A very specific group of people have always liked that kind of games, and myself included. And I'm not sure changing consoles really would have opened up any of that. I think that anybody who owned a Wii would be likely to someone who already enjoyed the series, such as myself, and such as a friend of mine who also already had a Wii for unrelated reasons. Which is a shame, because that series deserved to do better. That specific iteration, I should say, deserved to do better, but that's just my opinion. Let's see here. What is the worst game you have ever played and completed? Which is the kicker, because I've got plenty of worst games. Barbie's Mall Adventure. But I've never gotten further than, like, a couple of minutes into that one, because it's just that terrible. Worst game I ever actually completed, though. Give me just a moment as I think on that, because there's several that would qualify, but the problem is we're getting very relative, because most games I consider bad, I don't finish, I don't play, so we're gonna have to go back into the old stuff. How do I put this? Like, back when I was much younger and had a lot of free time to play a game that was there, that I had available, even if it wasn't good, because it was a game that was granted unto me, for whatever reason. In fact, I've got it. Okay, I've been thinking about it. I've already been thinking about it. Obviously, this is one of the recent questions. This is a two-way tie. There's a game on the Nintendo Entertainment System called Burger Time. Now, this is kind of a technically, but because I don't remember if that game ended or if you just got to a certain level and it's like, yay, okay, start over, like most games did in the time. But that game was terrible, and I only played it because my grandmother bought it for me, and I wanted to honor that, and so I played through it. The other one would be Lester the Unlikely. I've mentioned this, actually, which is a SNES game. Feel free to look it up, Lester the Unlikely, and it was a terrible side-scroller game with terrible controls, terrible everything. Everything about it was awful. And I played it through to fruition because it was the only game I had when I had some major illness or another, and I had several days of just sitting there. And it was that or watch TV, and I tend to prefer, doing rather than watching. So, that would be the one I'd go for. Now, next question here. You've stated before that you're a fan of the Pokemon series. Do you think they should consider making a more adult, mature cartoon show about the series and not fall into the darker and edgier thing? Or darkier and edgier thing, as I like to call it. That would be interesting. Give me just a second. Sorry about that. So, as I was saying, It would be interesting. I of course don't actually watch the Pokemon cartoon series. I vaguely got into the manga and just kind of keep up with b- uh, cliff notes nowadays. So part of the reason I didn't get into the show is it went, in my opinion, the complete wrong direction with it. It didn't actually feel like it was a Pokemon game. You know, the Pokemon games have always had a degree of believability to them, believe it or not. And the show very much is not believable. It is very much a tale. And I prefer the former, especially in a series like that. However, if they did manage to make a mature and adult storyline, like the manga has done several times, without falling into the darker and edgier trap, that could be cool. Even if it was still a cartoon, I wouldn't mind, because it would still be enjoyable, you know, and I would like to watch that, and it would be really cool. So I suppose that's a bit of a long answer. I apologize, but yes, I guess is the summary here of my answer here. Next question: Devil May Cry series, especially one, and are you excited about the reboot? Well, yes, I love the Devil May Cry series, except for two. As I mentioned in my previous video, or my previous video, a series by itself does not automatically engender itself to me, and Devil May Cry is a beautiful example of this. Devil May Cry 1, amazing game. Devil May Cry 3, absolutely incredible game. Just barely qualifies for the art, or rather, just barely doesn't qualify for the art category, but it's way up there. Amazing game. Probably my favorite example of third-person action combat ever made. You know, and Devil May Cry 4, despite the main character being Nero, and I only say that because not because he wasn't Dante, but because Nero was annoying. Despite that fact, I actually really like Devil May Cry 4. The new one looks terrible. I sincerely doubt I'll be buying it. Everything I've seen about it looks unpleasant, vile, unnecessary, and disinteresting. The only thing that could ever possibly appeal to me about it is the combat, and to be quite honest, if I wanted the awesome combat, I'd just go back and play Devil May Cry 3 rather than play a game that has awesome combat and unpleasant everything else. I'd like both, please. That would be preferable if you don't mind. So, next question here. Do you ever play Xbox Live with fans or listeners or whatever? I don't own an Xbox, as I've said before, and for reasons I've said before, because that was a question that was asked as well. So I guess the answer is no. If you're but to ask and answer the more general question, do I play games with any of the people who are my viewers here? The answer is also no, not counting people I knew before I started doing these videos. You know, most of the games I play multiplayer, which is several, you know, Diablo 3, Civilization 5, yeah, Secret of Mana, Guild Wars. These games I tend to play with my friends, with my people who I've known for some time in some place, and especially given my schedule of the very, very few periods of time which I have to play, I don't have the availability to do what what's-his-face who runs CAD, Control-Alt-Delete, does, where he says, I'm going to be playing this game on this server at this period of time. Feel free to join me. You know, I just can't really do that. So, no, I've never actually done that in any format, I suppose. Excuse me, yes, I did, I'm sorry, let's ask the question first. Do you ever play Wasteland, and you're excited about the sequel, which is being done by the same people who made the original? Yes, I did play Wasteland. I got into Wasteland quite a bit. Wasteland was essentially what led me to Fallout, for that matter, more or less indirectly, because when Fallout came out, it was described to me as Wasteland, but better. Or rather, when I got into Fallout, you know what I mean. I am rather excited about the sequel, but I'm holding my breath because I didn't like the way they were presenting the ad campaign. While it was certainly very accurate, something about it felt a little too hokey, and I would have rather he just come out and blatantly said, I want to do a game, I don't want to deal with the crap, please donate money so I can make my game. And for record, I did donate money. I did pitch in there because, you know, I would like to see that actually happen. So, here's hoping, as they say. Now, this is a weird question. This gentleman was asking, how does he get, does KOTOR work on Windows 7 and how do I get it? I don't know off the top of my head, but I've never actually had any problems running KOTOR or KOTOR 2 on Windows 7 on this box right here and on the one I got at home. So I'm not sure what to tell you about that. I suppose Google would be the answer there. If anybody else has any specific information, feel free to share in the comments, because I've got nothing. I've never had any issues, so I'm not sure what to tell you there. Who are your top tragic villains, like characters who aren't necessarily evil but fell through it to accomplish their goals or something like that? Yes, I do like tragic villains, and I got several for you right off the top of my head here. Londo Mollari. I know I talk about Babylon 5 a lot, but Londo Mollari in Babylon 5 is an awesome tragic villain, and one of my favorite characters of the show, I might add. Really well done. Example of the unintentional slide into darkness, literally as well as metaphorically speaking. Another example of a really good tragic villain would be Gygus, or Gigu, if you prefer. But that only really qualifies if you're looking at the backstory, and that also kind of ties into that. But let's go ahead and skip past all those and get to the really big ones. Londo Mollari, like I said. I don't know, I meant to start with Gygus, I'm sorry, just as an example of what I was talking about. And then I meant to give the big ones. Londo, Tyr Loghain from Dragon Age, who is definitely a very tragic villain, and like I said, it's an amazing game that takes a character I hate and makes me feel bad for killing him. And finally, virtually all of the Organization 13 nobodies, with one maybe exception. Depends on if my theory is right or not. If my theory is right, then I feel bad for him as well. But I do have a great deal of sympathy for all of the Organization nobodies. None more so than Saïx. Every single one of them had just this horribly heart-wrenching or terrible death scene, and every time I go through that game, it's just, I cringe just a little bit, because I didn't want to have to do that, if you know what I mean. Which, again, an example of a good villain. No, now, Tyr Loghain was better written than that. I'm not going to argue that, but the point remains sound. Next question. As a versed pen and paper RPG player, what is your opinion on the Spell Plague and what it did to FR? Do you think it was done correctly? Would you change events as they would? Would you blah, blah, blah. Would you do it to other settings as well? I thought the Spell Plague, for anyone who wasn't aware, the Spell Plague, to summarize massively, was a period of time when magic just didn't work or worked really wrong in a world that is basically founded on magic. So it really screwed up the setting, really threw the status quo out the window, and I liked that. I thought the Spell Plague was a great idea. I thought it was very well implemented. I thought the fact that it ended was correct, and I thought the fact that even after it ended, there's still side effects and there are still problems, both culturally and literally, and magically, that have cropped up as a result of that. I'm very looking forward to several of the new books and novels that are coming out to discuss post-Spell Plague. That being said, as far as I don't think I would have changed anything about how it was implemented. I think the way it started made perfect sense in lore. I think the way it was handled was really good. As far as applying that to other settings such as Eberron or Dragonlance, I don't think I would apply that to Eberron. Magic is simply too intricate to that setting, and having that almost feels like it's an unnecessary thing, if you follow what I mean. I don't know how to explain this properly, but I feel like it wouldn't add to Eberron. Dragonlance, on the other hand, I think could actually use that kind of a upset, could use that kind of a change in the status quo, as I said, to shake things up and make things more interesting. But that is, of course, just my opinion. Oh, let's see here. Who are your votes for the most whiny or least favorite game heroes? Now, I'm going to assume for a moment that we're talking primary characters only. Otherwise, Hope from FF13 would take that the title and the next 5 titles by himself. I'm sorry to keep overemphasizing this, but I really did not like Hope. That being said, I also don't count Vaughn, because even though he was the protagonist of FF12, he really wasn't. Ash, Bosch, and I can never think of his name, Balthier, were the actual main characters of FF12, if I'm honest here. So he doesn't count either. And I know I keep picking on the FFs, but they've had that tendency to have that slightly annoying character, and it's gotten a little bit worse as each game goes on. However, I am going to go ahead and pick a character who is from a Final Fantasy game, and that would be FF8, Squall. Now, I will give props to Squall. It took him the whole game, but he did actually grow as a character and become more than the whiny, emo, irritant, leave me alone, kind of character. It took the whole game to get there, but he did get it, so I'll give props for the fact that he stopped being that irritant character. But man, did he irritate me right at the beginning and towards the middle for a bit, and then less towards the end. Past that, I'd have to really think. Generally, the games I play are not games that have irritating main characters. And, oh shoot. So I'm going to go ahead and stop the video there, and go answer this phone call.